Great. So we are at 15 U.S. Code 1631, and that's just Part B of Subchapter 1. Part A we did 1601 to 1616. Now we're at 1631. Disclosure requirements. So that's 15 U.S. Code 1631. Disclosure requirements. Okay. And usually when you read stuff like this, when you see the word or, it usually means that it's included. Let's just read this as if or means included. Okay. Subject to subsection B. A creditor or lessor shall disclose to the person who is obligated on a consumer lease or a consumer credit transaction the information required under this subchapter. A creditor shall disclose the information required under this subchapter. In a transaction involving more than one obligor, except in a transaction under 1635 of this title, need not disclose to more than one of such obligor if the obligor given disclosure is a primary obligor. They didn't even have to put that in there. Right of rescission. Creditor or lessor required to make disclosure. If a transaction involves one creditor, as defined in section 1602F of this title, we just went over that in the previous video. Maybe we should go over it again so it'll stick in your head. Okay, creditor refers only to a person who regularly extends, whether in connection with loans, sales of property or services, or otherwise, who regularly extends consumer credit, which is payable by agreement in more than 4 installments, or for which the payment of a finance charge is or may be required. And a creditor refers to only a person who is the person to whom the debt arising from is initially payable on the face of the evidence of indebtedness or by agreement. Let's go back. B, if a transaction involves one creditor or one lessor, as defined in 1667, number 3 of this title. So they defined lesser for us. And since they defined lesser, we are going to look at it and we're going to see if I was right about the word or being included. So let's go look. The term lessor means a person who is regularly engaged in leasing, offering to lease, or arranging to lease under a consumer lease. The term consumer lease means a contract in the form of a lease or bailment for the use of personal property by a natural person for a period of time exceeding 4 months. That's that 4 installments. And for a total contractual obligation not exceeding 50,000, primarily for personal, family, or household purposes. Where have I seen those definitions before? Right. So, if a transaction involves one creditor or one lessor, such creditor or lessor shall make the disclosures. If a transaction involves more than one creditor or lessor, only one creditor shall be required to make the disclosures. The Bureau shall, by regulation, specify which creditor or lessor shall make the disclosures. Okay, so the term creditor is questionable, right? Unless a lease is the credit. Let's go back to lessor and consumer lease and see if we can compare consumer lease to credit. Huh? The term credit means the right granted by a creditor to a debtor to defer payment of debt. Ooh, they are so slick with these words. And you have to you they are really slick with these words. Okay? Creditor means the right, a credit means the right granted by a creditor to a debtor to defer payment or to incur debt and defer payment. That is the definition of credit. Consumer lease is the contract in the form of a lease or bailment for the use of personal property for a period of time exceeding 4 months. That term shall not include any credit sale. Okay, let's see what credit sale is. Any sale which the seller is a creditor. Any contract in the form of a bailment or a lease. Excuse me? Okay, before we get confused, let's go and head back to disclosure requirements because I don't usually do that, but they have so many definitions in here that I could not help myself. We are at C. Estimates as satisfying statutory requirements, basis of disclosure for per diem interest. The Bureau may provide by regulation that any portion of the information required to be disclosed by this subchapter may be given in the form of estimates where the provider of such information is not in a position to know exact information. In the case of any consumer credit transaction, a portion of the interest on which is determined on a per diem basis and is to be collected upon the consummation of such transaction. Any disclosure with respect to such portion of interest shall be deemed to be accurate for purposes of this subchapter if the disclosure based on information actually known to the creditor at the time that the disclosure documents are being prepared for consummation of the transaction. D. Tolerances for numerical disclosure. The Bureau shall determine whether tolerances for numerical disclosures other than the annual percentage rate are necessary to facilitate compliance with this subchapter, and if it determines that such tolerances are necessary to facilitate compliance, it shall be by regulation permit disclosures with such tolerances. The Bureau shall exercise its authority to permit tolerances for numerical disclosures other than the annual percentage rate so that such tolerances are narrow enough to prevent such tolerances from resulting in misleading disclosures or disclosures that circumvent the purposes of this chapter.